I'm not Marianne Glendon. I'm Michael Moreland. I teach in the law school at Villanova University outside of Philadelphia. And I was a fellow here at the Center for Ethics and Culture a few years ago. And I was happy to pinch hit when Margaret asked, and I learned that Marianne Glendon is stranded in an airport and unable to be here. So I will introduce our speakers in the order in which they will speak, and then they will in turn make their remarks, and we should have some time for questions and answers at the end, and then hope to conclude about 4:30 or so. So first, Patrizia Giunti is full professor of Roman law at the University of Florence, where she served as director of the Department of Legal Sciences and member of the University Senate. She currently holds an appointment as professor of Roman law at the Pontifical Lateran University of the Vatican City State. She earned her PhD from the University of Rome La Sapienza and was researcher of Roman law at the University of Urbino. Her main research interests in recent years range from the conditions of legal subjectivity, family relationships and marriage as a legal institution, to issues related to natural obligations and the role of jurisprudence. And she will speak first. Speaking second will be Professor Catherine Zuckert, Emeritus Nancy Reeves-Droe Professor of Political Science here at the University of Notre Dame, and currently a visiting professor at Arizona State University's School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership. She received her BA from Cornell University and both her MA and PhD from the University of Chicago. Professor Zuckert has written extensively on political philosophy and politics and literature. Her books Natural Right in the American Imagination, Political Philosophy in Novel Form, and Plato's Philosophers, The Coherence of the Dialogues, were both recognized by the American Association of Publishers, winning the Professional and Scholarly Publishing Award and the R.R. Hawkins Award, respectively. She served as the editor-in-chief of the Review of Politics from 2004 to 2018 and has been the recipient of several grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, as well as the Bradley and Earhart Foundations. Welcome.
Thank you all. Thank you, Carter, for inviting me. Thank you for introducing me. It's a gift. I won't forget it. So, these brief notes will focus on the meaning and the rule that the ancients' thinking attributed to friendship. As the title highlights, specific attention will be paid to experiences from ancient Rome. This will be analyzed from a privileged point of view, that of a text specifically devoted to friendship. The work of a writer epitomizing the accomplished intellectual, an example of multifaceted ingenuity, philosopher, lawyer, rhetor, man of letters representing an authentic stylistic tradition. The viewpoint of Cicero and his Laelius de Amicitia. For many reasons, De Amicitia is a peculiar work. Firstly, it takes the form of a dialogue, a literary genre inherited by the Platonic Aristotelian tradition, whose highly dramatic tones allow for an in-depth analysis of the main theme, thanks to its question and answer structure and the continuous exchange of opinions it implies. As a modern times example, let us think of the liveliness and the effectiveness of a newspaper interview compared to a monologue-styled article. So, Laelius de Amicitia is a dialogue, more precisely a fictional dialogue, taking place almost 90 years before its drafting. The main characters are prominent figures from the national Republican history, Gaius Laelius in the first place, after whom the work gets its title. Born to the great general Gaius Laelius' father, the consul who had served as Scipio African's right-hand man in the war against the Carthaginian general Hannibal, they both, Gaius Laelius' son was nicknamed Sapiens, the Wise, because of his knowledge and wisdom. Gaius Laelius Sapiens, the son, too, served as consul in 140 BC and was close friend with Scipio Aemilianus, the final destroyer of Carthage. Cicero imagines that the dialogue takes place in 129 BC, few months after Scipio Aemilianus' controversial death, a suspected suicide, an alleged murder, the latter hypothesis Cicero will endorse in another one of his works, which occurred in particularly turbulent times. These are the years linked to the name of Gracchi brothers. Particularly, this is the time of Tiberius Gracchus, the older one, the tribune of the plebs who promoted a redistributive land reform aimed at supporting the agricultural proletariat. Tiberius was murdered in 133 BC, and a few years later, in the tragic uprising that followed, Scipio Aemilianus II, who had tried to stop the land reform after Tiberius' death, found his own death. Cicero then pictures himself, this is Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, now we have it. Cicero then pictures himself listening to Gaius Laelius, recalling his recently dead friend and the close ties between them in a conversation among Laelius and his sons-in-law Gaius Fannius and Mucius Scaevola. It's almost a family conversation, and from this conversation, Laelius takes the moves to meditate on the nature and value of friendship. This dialogue is then a fictional, autobiographical account reflecting Cicero's actual biography, which is told through Laelius' words. Accordingly, the times in which the dialogue is set, the year 129 BC, and the social and political unrest that followed Tiberius Gracchus' political deeds and death, clearly mirror the real-life events that Cicero is experiencing at the time of writings. In fact, the Amicitia was written between the summer and the autumn of 44 AC, few months after those Ides of March that saw the murdering of Julius Caesar in times of extraordinary political and social unrest. Again, the account of the friendship between Laelius and Scipio Aemilianus runs in parallel with that of the friendship between Cicero and Atticus, as told by Cicero himself. Cicero dedicates his De Amicitia to Titus Pomponius Atticus, man of letters and businessman, friend of a lifetime since their school years. In the first paragraphs of this work, he makes this choice clear with unusually explicit words. This is the text. So now, in this book, I have written as a most affectionate friend to a friend on the subject of friendship. Such overlapping between fiction and personal diary is especially apparent in the very heart of the work's main theme, the perception of friendship against the backdrop of the upcoming civil war. Laelius' fictional words in De Amicitia, this is the text, quocunque mi coniuncta cura de publica re et de privata fuit, I feel as if my life has been happy because it was spent with Scipio, with whom I shared my public and private cares, echo those Cicero addressed to Atticus on January 60 BC. You who are ever my ally in public affairs, my confidant in all private business. In both contexts, friendship unveils as a partnership suitable for all seasons and all circumstances, be them public or private. If the main lines could already be traced all along Cicero's private epistolary, the drafting of De Amicitia in 44 BC mirrors his need to reanalyze friendship in a comprehensive and systematic manner in time of skyrocketing discordia civium, hate between citizens. By discussing friendship, Cicero aims at offering help. Ut de amicitia scriberem aliquid, ut prodessem multis. For why you are pleading with me again and again to write something on friendship? Therefore, I have not been unwilling to benefit the public. Education is his purpose here. Political education, to be more precise. The definition of a program of ethical and cultural regeneration as a reaction to the decay of the traditional connection between friendship and politics. This is exactly the core issue around which the dialogue revolves, the connection between friendship and politics. Such problematic relation is broken down into two further questions. What is friendship? Which understanding of politics does it apply to? These two questions represent the cornerstone of the debate between the two different philosophical approaches that attempted to answer them. Stoicism on the one hand, and Epicureanism on the other one. Cicero is perfectly coherent with such tradition of philosophical dispute. Featuring Laelius as the main character and through his words the remembrances of Scipio Aemilianus, indeed the dialogue perfectly fits the same ethical philosophical framework within which Cicero had already set his De Republica. It is the Scipionist circle, a group of artists, intellectuals, politicians, including Laelius himself, gathered around the Scipion's family and supporting a philhellenistic and therefore strongly philosophy-based renewal of the Roman culture. Against this backdrop is set De Amicitia, all along which Cicero will repeatedly show his affinity with Stoicist positions, though blending them with his own unique views. Cicero manifestly departs from purely theoretical stances to oppose them with a more pragmatic viewpoint, grounded on history and the men who made it, men that serve as examples. History, as a chain of exempla, has in itself the strength of a pedagogical model based on the educational effectiveness of tangible examples. Such effectiveness is far stronger than that of theoretical speculation. Consequently, it is from the example of great men that Cicero draws his answer to the question on the meaning of friendship in connection with politics. In elaborating this answer, the great mediator Cicero brings together the reformist ambition of Philhellenistic circles and the defense of tradition, of the mos maiorum, the ancient praxis supported by conservative groups. In fact, while Greek thinking did not consider the so-called utilitarian relations as true friendship, in the customary Roman system, friendship possessed a specific politics-driven utilitarian connotation. Friendship granted a network of relationship and of personal, family, or kinship-based context, capable of supporting candidacies, winning elections, creating vertical alliances between individuals and groups, gathering around this or that center of power. In other words, a given politician could not have had the opportunity to attain his goals had he not benefited from such cooperation and clientelism-based networks. According to the logic behind this utilitarian notion, friendship must serve as a way to overcome personal limits through mutual favors. Where one cannot get on his own, he can get through friends' support. Friendship supplements individual deficiencies. This approach can be easily understood if we consider the purely utilitarian nature of the Roman political system. We are far from the modern perspective. There are no modern-style political parties, shaped as groups that are held together by a comprehensive program for the management of a given community. In Rome, a politician is an individual, oftentimes the leader of a faction, who uses his network of family and personal relations to obtain an office or position and favor his supporters in return. Brecht. The current crisis of traditional parties, coupled with the ability of contemporary social networks to steer public opinion and consensus, no coincidence that they are based on friendship, may suggest that Western democracies are somehow getting closer to ancient Rome. Close Brecht. However, notwithstanding that, Cicero challenges this supplement-driven logic behind friendship. Should it serve to correct deficiencies and compensate limits only, friendship would be exclusively for the mediocre. This is the text. No, sorry. No. Ecco, eccolo qua. This I do feel first of all. Sorry. I'm professor of Roman law, and this is the perfect evidence. I don't find the text. I've lost it. It was a good test where Cicero shows how is contrary to this perception. Much to the contrary, friendship's distinctive feature is the ability to connect the best men in sharing of virtue. Friendship occurs only between those who excel in virtue. However, in Cicero's perspective, virtue is not a general ethical tendency and does not have any class-related connotation. Virtue is human inclination to associated life. It is individual action for the common good. Virtue is the sum of those values, trustworthiness, ethical firmness, and so on, that do not benefit individuals only, but the res publica, the state as a whole. Along this line, from which the supremacy of politics in Rome is apparent, Cicero elaborates the archetype of political friendship. This stems from a shared notion of state in the first place, from a shared idea of the common good, and holds virtuous citizens, boni vires, together, pushing them to take concrete action for the common benefit. In this way, Cicero manages to combine the ethical and unselfish value of friendship, as elaborated by Stoicism, with the politics-driven notion typical of the Roman tradition. And this is the text. This is a very important text, and of course now we read it. This is, I do feel first of all, that friendship cannot exist except among good men. But they say, and they are the philosophers, they say that no one is good unless he is wise. We may grant, but they understand wisdom to be a thing such as no mortal man has yet attained. I, however, am bound to look at things as they are in the experience of everyday life, and not as they are in fancy or in hope. This is the pragmatic approach combined with the philosophical perception. Look at, and these are the great men who made the Roman history, Caium Fabricium, Manlium Curium, Tiberium Conjuncanium. He was the first lawyer who was born in the popular class and the lower class. So this is the central idea of this work. However, comparison between such theoretical model and the actual political experience that followed 129 BC, when Cicero fictionally set the dialogue, leads to a dramatic outcome in which the pessimism of the intellect prevails over the optimism of the will. The season of civil war caused such a high level of conflict among the citizens that friendship as the ethical vision of the common good has turned into poor partisanship, a merely opportunistic choice driven by ephemeral interests. In 44 BC, when Cicero is writing the Amicitia, the ideal of political and personal friendship, as characterized by personal traits precisely because of its political connotation, that Cicero expresses through Laelius' words, does not exist anymore. Political friendship is now one with conspiracies and opportunistic alliances between contrasting factions. Cicero himself, will succumb to this very system in the end. On December 43 BC, killers hired by Antonius will murder Cicero only a year after the writing of the Amicitia. So, and what retrospectively appears to us as a spiritual testament in which Cicero analyzes the choice between friendship as an intimate feeling and friendship as the expression of the highest civic virtue connected to the necessary political commitment in the pursuit of the state's interest. In the end, only personal and spiritual friendship retains its meaning. This is the vision of friendship that a tired and disappointed Cicero entrusts to Laelius' words in the final part of the dialogue. If someone could contemplate the perfection of the word and the beauty of the stars from above, he would not be able to rejoice of that if he had no one to share it with. I just want someone to talk to. Friendship defeats solitude, the emptiness of human existence. It is communicating one's own most intimate feelings and sharing experiences that nurtures it. The meaning of friendship is exchanging words capable of conveying knowledge and emotions. This statement offers a glimpse on how strong Cicero's relation with Atticus, with his friend Atticus, was, on how intense their communication was, as their epistolary testifies. This is one of the copy, of course, of the epistolary between Cicero and Atticus. A few decades later, another very famous epistolary will connect two friends, the philosopher Seneca and Lucilius, his friends. Seneca writes to Lucilius, who was serving as a procurator in Sicily at that time. This is the speech from the Questiones Naturales. Although separated by the sea, I will try to lead you by the hand towards the good. From here, I will have conversations with you, for you not to feel alone. We will be together, united in the best part of us. Again, a few decades later, around 90 BC, AD, 90 AD, the Gospel of John. John 15:15. Uceti legumas dulus. I do not call you servant any longer, because a servant does not know what his master does. And then the title of this conference. Instead, I've called you friends, since everything that I learned from my Father, I've made known to you. The difference between a slave and a friend is made by communication. I don't speak with the slave, but I speak with my friend. And our relationship is our capacity to talk each other, sharing emotions, knowledge, feelings, whatever we know. The Gospel of John testify the close connection between the late Republican and early Principate Roman philosophical culture linked with the Stoicism and the message conveyed by the early Christian communities. Thank you so much for your attention.
I have to apologize for the lack of technological assistance. It's old-fashioned paper. My talk this afternoon concerns a human relation often described at its best as a kind of friendship. That, as the title of my talk suggests, is the relation between teacher and student. It is, moreover, a form of friendship that I suspect is very close to the educational concerns of many of the participants in this conference. The text upon which I propose to comment in examining the character of this particular form of human association is the famous speech Socrates gives in Plato's Phaedrus, in which he compares the soul to a winged pair of horses guided by a charioteer. The subtitle of my talk is drawn from a statement Socrates makes towards the end of this rather poetic description of the kind of erotic association that he argues brings human beings the greatest happiness possible. There he observes that a youth who comes to appreciate the attempts of a loving adult to enable him to realize his full potential will gradually feel a desire to reciprocate the benefactor's love. And I quote, "The youth does not know what he has experienced, nor can he tell. He calls it and thinks it to be not love, but friendship." The word Socrates uses for love here is eros, which he contrasts to friendship or philia. So in the age of sexual harassment policies and the Me Too movement, I should immediately pause to remind you that I am talking about a Platonic dialogue. And we all know that Platonic love is, well, Platonic or chaste. In the Phaedrus, Socrates explicitly recognizes that there are not merely bodily, but sexually tinged impulses aroused by the loving association he describes between a philosopher and a youth. However, he insists, in the best cases, these impulses will be controlled by the reverence and respect the partners have for one another. Platonic love is more mental than it is physical, and it concerns the soul more than the body. Nevertheless, Socrates insists that this relation is love, and not, should I say, in this context, merely friendship. Indeed, Socrates announces at the beginning of his description of this very rare, but best because happiest form of human association, it is first necessary to comprehend the nature of soul, both what it suffers or feels, in Greek pathe, and what it does or affects, its erga. He acknowledges that the terribly clever materialists who think that everything is matter in motion will not be persuaded by what he says, but he thinks the wise will trust it. Socrates then presents a very brief argument to show that the soul is immortal. He begins, in effect, from the common observation that in contrast to dead bodies, which can only be moved by something external, living beings appear to be self-moving. The ancient Greeks called living beings ensouled, or emsukos, because they have something within them that enables them to move themselves. If soul is self-moving, Socrates then reasons, it cannot have a beginning because that would require something to move it, that is, to bring it into being. Nor can a self-moving being have an end because that again would require something else to make it stop its motion. As self-moving, it is therefore the nature of soul to be immortal. And Socrates observed simply in passing, the sensible cosmos with its stream of becoming would come to an end if there were no such thing as a self-moving soul. However, Socrates almost immediately acknowledges it would require a divine discourse of great length beyond the power of a human being to explain what sort of thing soul is. All he can do is to say what it's like, which he does. Let me pause here, however, to note that Socrates makes three important claims in this beginning. First, he is suggesting that human happiness depends upon our having some relation to something immortal. If everything is transitory, comes into being, and goes away, it is easy to conclude, as the chorus at the end of Oedipus Colonos does, that it would be best not to be born, and second best to die soon, because nothing lasts. Since no effort has a lasting effect, there's nothing we're striving for. Second, we know through our senses that things in this world obviously do move. However, Socrates reminds us, we have no direct knowledge of the source of the motion, even though we ourselves participate in it. Third, although human beings have no direct knowledge or access to the sources and character of the invisible motions that are responsible both for the order of the cosmos and our own lives, human beings can and do learn something about those sources by thinking about our sensible experiences. As he points out not much later in the speech, human beings are distinguished from other animals by our ability to group together sense perceptions into different types or kinds of things. And as types or kinds or ideas, these are not sensible, but they are intelligible. This is the ability that enables us to speak, and what we say gives us access or potential knowledge of what we cannot immediately perceive, but that we can abstract and reason out of our experience. That is how Socrates can describe what the soul is like, even though he cannot say, strictly speaking, what it is. Socrates then famously proposes that the soul, both human and divine, is like a winged pair of horses with a charioteer. The horses represent forward motion, the charioteer represents intelligent direction of that motion, and the wings enable the soul to move up and down. In divine souls, Socrates explains, both horses are good, so that they work together. Guided by their charioteer, divine souls move through the cosmos easily, assuming different forms and functions in taking care of the things that come to be. Socrates associates the various kinds of care the divine souls perform loosely with the functions traditionally in Greece attributed to the Olympian gods, even though he later argues it is a mistake to conceive of immortal gods with bodies. But he does not give a detailed list of the functions the divine souls need to perform, nor does he explain the sources and character of the differences among gods. The point of his initial description of the movements of soul, both divine and human, is to allow him to indicate, first, the difference between divine and human souls. Second, the difference between human souls and those of other animals. And third, the sources of the differences among human intellects. In describing the motions of the divine souls, Socrates says only that as they traverse the cosmos, their wings enable them to rise to its outer limits. And there, resting on the edge of the visible world as it turns, the charioteers are able to contemplate the only beings that truly are, beings like the good, the beautiful, and the just, which are purely intelligible and thus not visible, and which do not themselves, therefore, move or change. The wings of the soul are nourished by the contemplation of these purely intelligible beings by the charioteer, So after the world has completed a rotation, the divine souls return to the center, where the charioteer gives the horses ambrosia and nectar, the traditional food of the Greek gods. The divine souls thus appear to constitute sets of eternally repetitive, intelligible motions which order and preserve everything else in the cosmos. The radical part. According to Socrates, human souls have the same composition and structure as divine souls, with one important exception. In human souls, the two horses do not work in tandem, but often in opposition to one another, because in human souls, only one of the horses is good, the other is bad. As a consequence of the conflict between the two horses, or drives, human souls do not move as easily or smoothly as the divine. They follow divine souls as they traverse and care for the cosmos, forming, in quotes, an army led by Zeus. But each human soul selects a particular god to follow, which is to say, soul selects which function to perform according to its natural inclination. As in the case of divine souls, so with regard to humans, Socrates does not explain the character or sources of the differences in natural inclination. He simply recognizes that they exist. However, he does explain that the conflict between the two horses in human souls prevents them from rising smoothly to the edge of the cosmos and remaining there so their charioteers or minds can look steadily at the true beings while the world rotates. The bad soul drags human souls, bad horse drags human souls down. Moving up and down in a confused fashion, the human souls bump up against one another and their wings are destroyed. Because the conflict within human souls prevents them from rising and remaining steadily at the surface of the cosmos, only the heads of the charioteers of a few human souls are able to contemplate the purely intelligible beings for an entire rotation. A few more are able to see snatches as they bob up and down. But most are not able to rise to the surface at all. And in all human souls, the wings are eventually destroyed by the confusion and conflict they encounter as they strive to rise to the top. After their wings are destroyed, human souls fall to earth where they become attached to bodies and are no longer able to rise to contemplate the true beings. However, Socrates specifies, all souls which have seen any part of the true beings are first incarnated in human bodies. Socrates has observed that human beings are distinguished from other animals by our ability to gather disparate sense perceptions together into a certain unity, idea, or type. This is the ability that makes it possible for us to speak, and the types or kinds we find reflect, to be sure often imperfectly and inaccurately, the perfectly intelligible beings to which as embodied minds we do not have direct or immediate access. It is, in fact, this experienced and observed human ability that leads Socrates to conclude that perfectly intelligible, unchanging beings exist, even though we human beings cannot directly intuit them. And he never gives a definitive list of the purely intelligible ideas, nor does he claim to know them all. Let me pause again to note, in this figurative description of the similarities and differences between divine and human souls, Socrates is again making three important claims. First, the difference between human and divine is not, as often thought, the difference between what is mortal and what dies, and what does not die and is therefore immortal or athanatos. As self-moving, Socrates argues, souls are immortal, bodies are not. The conception of gods, like the traditional Olympians, as immortals with bodies is therefore not based on reason, as she says explicitly. Second, although Socrates suggests that the religious beliefs of most of his contemporaries are faulty, he also indicates that there is something divine, which is to say immortal, in or accessible to every human being. Third, the divine part of every human soul is not evident because the motions of human souls are confused and conflict with one another. The human mind is not strong enough to bring order to the conflicting passions. Because it is joined to a body, it no longer has the ability to contemplate the purely intelligible beings in terms of which the sensible cosmos is organized. Socrates acknowledges that a few human beings may be able to recollect the ideas of purely intelligible beings like justice and moderation by abstracting them out of the many imperfect examples of their sensible manifestations. But he notes, the process is extremely difficult and few are prompted to such an arduous endeavor. Because they are purely intelligible, Socrates explains, the beings, the unchangeable beings that truly are, do not have sensible qualities like color, shape, or feel. They are visible to the mind alone. There is, however, one exception. Beauty shines not only in the mind, but also to the brightest of our senses, sight. And it not merely attracts human beings, it arouses their erotic passions. It might help at this point to remind you that the ancient Greek word for beauty is often translated as noble. To kalon does not refer simply to the visible appearance of something or a person. It also has what we would call ethical or moral connotations. As Aristotle indicates in his Nicomachean Ethics, to kalon is what is desirable and worth doing in and for itself, not because it's good for anything else. The beautiful or noble is not good because it gives pleasure to the one who acts nobly or to someone who merely views or receives the benefits of noble deeds. The noble is perhaps the clearest example of something good in itself. Yet acting nobly is often extremely costly, if not painful, for the human beings who do so. The sacrifice of one's life defending a country is the classic example. In most human beings, Socrates acknowledges, the sight of a beautiful young person merely arouses a desire for the pleasure of sexual intercourse. This is the form of eros that he blames when it is not restrained or moderated. In a few human beings, however, the sight of a beautiful youth arouses something like terror, followed by awe. These few see something in a beautiful young person that is more than that person, something that shines through them. They see a sensible manifestation of a purely intelligible quality that is more and greater than the particular example. If these few lovers of the beautiful did not realize that they would make themselves ridiculous by acting on the impulse, he says, they would be tempted to worship the youth as a god. Instead, these lovers of the beautiful or the noble begin to do everything possible to become as beautiful or as noble as they can, as part of their urging and seeking the youth to realize his potential or promise. Moreover, they see and cherish the youth as the cause of their own endeavors to become a better human being. This is obviously the way in which a lover of the beautiful becomes a philosopher in Socrates' term, or a teacher in mine. In the cosmic account of the different kinds of souls with which he begins, Socrates emphasizes the differences among both divine souls and the humans who follow them, as well as among the humans, both in their natural inclinations or passions and in the number of the purely intelligible beings they have seen or can recollect. And in discussing the effect of the sight of beauty on them, he again emphasizes the importance of these differences. Most react to the sight of beauty by becoming sexually aroused, but even those who react with awe and thus are restrained, he observes, as we do, different individuals have different views of beauty or nobility. Different individuals are thus attracted by different images or embodiments of their particular notion of the best possible form of human existence. Because there are many different conceptions of the best life, it is possible that no one will find his or her soulmate. The human relation Socrates describes in the Phaedrus is very rare. That is why he finds it necessary to preface his description of such an association with a poetic account of the soul, the ways in which divine souls preserve and care for the cosmos, and the reasons, so to speak, human souls differ so much in their capacity to learn the truth about the intelligible organization of the cosmos, as well as themselves. Socrates cannot appeal to an experience most of Plato's readers will not have had themselves. He can only give a picture, so to speak, of what kind of human life is desirable and why, because he recognizes that this life lies outside and beyond the experience of most. Because the few human beings who react with awe to an encounter with a beautiful youth are embodied, Socrates describes the lover's initial reactions in terms of bodily sensations that are explicitly sexual. The person whose eros has been aroused by the sight of an attractive youth doesn't know what's come over him. He simply knows that he suffers when the youth is no longer present, and he becomes happier when they meet again. Painfully aware of the extraordinary potential the youth exhibits, the teacher exerts himself to help the youth realize it, lavishing more time and attention on educating the literally awesome youth than on his own children, family, economic, or professional interests. You will remember how rare I've said this relation is. And like many of the readers of the Phaedrus, I am taking Socrates as the primary example. Graduate teachers particularly are often accused of wanting to make their students into clones of themselves. But if they are like the teachers Socrates describes in the Phaedrus, they do not want to make their students merely like them. They want to make themselves and their students better. In other words, they want to persuade their students to embrace their aspirations and to come even closer to achieving those aspirations than they themselves have. Socrates returns to his image of the soul as two horses guided by a charioteer in order to describe the conflict in the soul of a person who perceives a possible soulmate in a beautiful youth he encounters. The white horse on the right is a dark-eyed lover of honor, moderate and full of reverence. Obeying the guidance of the charioteer without compulsion, this horse draws back in awe. The dark horse, on the other hand, is big and ill-shaped, has a short, strong neck, stub nose, gray eyes, and shaggy fur. Moreover, it is deaf, and it barely yields to the charioteer's whip. In other words, it does not easily or willingly obey commands. Full of unruly desires for bodily pleasures, the dark horse leaps forward, eager to embrace the youth, and angrily berates his companion and the charioteer for holding it back. Recovering from the pain of the charioteers, having pulled the reins back so tightly, it pulls them all forward again, only to be opposed even more strongly and painfully by the combination of the charioteer and the white horse. Only after this pulling forward and painfully reinforced restraint has been repeated many times does the knavish horse learn to see a beautiful youth with fear rather than wanton desire, and to follow the commands of the charioteer mind. In other words, the dark, passionate drives in a human soul are not restrained by persuasion or reason. They are checked only by training or habituation. The mind of the charioteer guides, but it is necessary to conjoin the mind's command with the restraining power of the white horse and another passion, fear, aroused by a natural aversion to pain, in order to check the force of the bodily desires for pleasure effectively. Nevertheless, Socrates argues more straightforwardly There is good reason for an older person attracted to a comely youth to restrain his or her erotic desires. Basically, if a teacher or other older person expresses or acts on these feelings directly, the youth will be repulsed. Only after the teacher has demonstrated time and again that he or she cares more and better for the youth than do the youth's family or friends, and the youth has gradually become conscious of the benefits of the teacher's attention, only then does the youth begin to reciprocate the teacher's affection. The youth is apt, to go back to the title, to mistake the love he feels for friendship, because it was not initially aroused, as was the attraction of the older benefactor, by his mentor's apparent beauty or nobility. The youth's reciprocal love is gradually awakened by his experience of the singularly beneficial results of his associating with his mentor over time. The character of the youth's loving response to his mentor and of their future association will thus be determined to a large extent by the example provided by the elder. If, after demonstrating the benefits of his loving care for a considerable time, the beloved mentor makes a physical advance, Socrates suggests that the youth will probably try to gratify him. But, and I quote, well, in English, if the better parts of their thought conquer, leading them into a well-arranged way of life and philosophy, the lovers will lead a blessed life, their minds in harmony, because they will be orderly masters of themselves, having enslaved that which gave rise to evil within them, and freed that by which they are becoming virtuous. And Socrates concludes, there is no greater good than this for a human being. Even if they adopt a way of life that's coarser and philosophic from his point of view, by giving way occasionally to their sexual impulses, they will have lived as friends if they choose to stay together for life. In the Phaedrus, I thus contend, Socrates reminds us of just how fraught the relation between a teacher or mentor and a student can be. Teachers earn their livings and pursue their own studies by attracting students. And students or their parents employ teachers in order to help the young find future employment and happiness. Sometimes students are interested not merely in becoming better scholars or scientists or lawyers or financiers or physicians, but in becoming better, happier individuals. Most respond positively to a teacher who expresses confidence in their ability to do so. And dedicated teachers attempt to help all their students improve as much as they can. Those of us who teach, however, know that a teacher's greatest joy and greatest potential disappointment occurs when he or she encounters a student who demonstrates truly remarkable potential. That teacher will try to do his or her utmost to learn and teach as well as he or she can, by example as well as by precept, to enable the student to realize his or her promise. But as Socrates indicates, and we all know from experience, not every teacher attracts all the best students, and even when they are attracted to a life of inquiry, many of the most promising students do not persevere in their studies. In the Phaedrus, Plato reminds his readers that neither philosophy nor teaching is simply or strictly an intellectual affair. Both involve strong human passions that need to be controlled, but that will not be controlled if teachers and students do not become aware of the kinds of passions that can be aroused and the confused responses these passions may call forth. In the age of charges of sexual harassment and the abuse of power by professors or teachers, you may think such a warning isn't needed. But the possible abuses and misuses of a teacher's influence, indeed the most common abuses and misuses, are not sexual. Students often perceive teachers as insisting on their regurgitating what the instructor has said in lecture, or more generally reproducing in some fashion what he or she wants. Haven't you been asked, what do you want? This may or may not be the instructor's intention, but in either case, it does not constitute true inquiry or teaching. As Socrates suggests, a true teacher and a true student are engaged in a reciprocal effort to improve their characters and deeds. They are united not merely by reciprocal affection and respect. They are united in a joint effort to achieve a shared ideal, which neither of them has yet realized or probably ever will realize. As you may have noticed, I have mostly used the male pronoun in presenting Socrates' description of philosophic eros and its benefits. In so doing, I have remained true to the text, or tried to be. But I am pretty obviously a female, and I think that Socrates' description can apply to females as well as males. In the Phaedrus, Plato shows Socrates speaking in the context of the pederastic practices of ancient Greece. He is explicitly critical of these practices as they were customarily understood at the time. However, speaking in that context enables him to free philosophic eros, as he understands it, from the procreative desire to perpetuate oneself by means of sexual intercourse, with which Giunti links the philosophic pursuit of beauty in Plato's Symposium. As Socrates presents philosophic eros in the Phaedrus, it is neither selfish nor selfless, although it may initially appear to be selfless in the older lover or mentor. It does result in the formation of the minds and characters of both the mentor and student, but it does not constitute the art of care as Michel Foucault defines it, because the idea or ideal both teacher and student are striving to realize is not simply a human construction. Socrates recognizes that human beings have different conceptions of the noble, but he also maintains that there is ultimately a common idea of the noble or beautiful manifested in all these different conceptions. And that is in itself purely intelligible and therefore eternally unchanging. That is what philosophic lovers are striving to come to know and to embody in their lives together to the greatest extent possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for two excellent papers. I'm mindful of the time, but we did get started a bit late, so we have time for maybe a couple questions before adjourning shortly after or at 4:30. If you have a question, if you could come to one of the microphones here and introduce yourself, and we'll start on either side here. Go ahead, Father.
Father Henry Steffen. I'm a Dominican friar in the province of St. Joseph. Professor Giunti, I am curious about your understanding of Amicitia, because at times when reading it, it seems like Laelius has a higher estimation of friendship than Scipio does. Scipio seems to recognize, especially in his famous dream, that there is a greater good towards which friendship is ordered, whereas Laelius seems totally absorbed by just how wonderful friendship is. So I'm curious, do you think that reflects some of Cicero's own conflict about it, or how you understand that possible distinction?
Sorry, I'm not so sure I've understood exactly.
Well, it seems that Laelius thinks that friendship may be the highest good. Mm-hmm. Scipio, it seems, may think that friendship is actually about loving a greater good, especially in that famous dream at the end. Do you think Cicero's aware of this conflict or consciously seeking to resolve it? Or maybe he himself is a bit conflicted about it?
Sorry. No, but we ask for many questions and then, or
no,
I
go
go
ahead.
to the answer.
You can go ahead and you can respond to that. Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the idea, I think that this conflict is a conflict of Cicero himself. The 44 is a special year in the life and in the conflict experience of Cicero. The worst year, but per paradox, the most glorious. here in his life. After Julius Caesar's death, Cicero is living a special season, and he felt himself as a savior, and probably many citizens too, the most moderate citizens, looked at him as a possible savior in that phase so complicated between the followers of Julius Caesar and the killers of Caesar. So in this perspective of himself as a possible savior, but perfectly coherent with an experience that showed that it was just a hope. Cicero himself has his own struggle between the idea of a great friendship as a model of life, and friendship as something that is just a hope and that cannot be gotten now. And so it's a conflict in himself. And the conflict is the portrait that he can realize in this description of Laelius and Scipio Aemilianus. Their experience, their friendship is something that Cicero describes as a dream. Something that, of course, he doesn't know, or he read something about that, but surely he didn't meet them. But what he describes is his own idea of friendship, but in the same time, these own ideas is in contrast with the perception of reality. And the knowledge and the perfect knowledge of this reality he has around him.
Professor Nagorski, I saw that you were up.
Okay, thank you, Walter Nagorski, University of Notre Dame, and I'm addressing my comment to Professor Giunti also. Thank you for a fine paper and for highlighting the notion of complete or perfect friendship as it emerges in De Amicitia, and then sketching how it carries through the first century. That's so important for a conference like this to be reminded of, as your paper does. And what I ask for is maybe clarification and amplification of the notion of the perfect friendship, which you just located in a dream of Cicero, and whether you create a strong separation between the friendship that Cicero aspires to and describes and the public sector of factions and alliances. When you spoke of the political environment, both for the dramatic setting of the dialogue and then for Cicero's personal setting as author, you spoke of Cicero capitulating or falling to that system. I'm assuming you didn't mean that he abandoned the notion that working for genuine friendships, as exemplified between himself and Atticus, it was something to try to uplift the factionalism of Rome, and rather than say that private friendship, this good friendship, is a preserve over here, and public life is this terrible struggle over here that Cicero got swept into by his own bad judgments. So a little clarification on that.
Thank you for this question. Really, I agree with you, and I think you have perfectly and you've seen what is the point. It is a dramatic period, and we are in front of a real drama, the drama of a man of many men, the drama of a state, the drama of a tradition, the drama which is the root of our modernity, our times. So in that moment, we can see the root of what happened in Europe and in the western part of the world later. So these few years, if we look at this experience, it's an experience of few years, but the years were able to change the history of the world, because after Republic, after Cicero's death, in a few years, August will arrive, and then the Republic experience died forever. And from that moment, the empire will begin, and this will be a complete history. So this is a sliding door, a turning point. These years are a turning point. In this moment, alliances, struggles, friendships too made the difference. In the single lives, we are in front of men, individual, where their feelings, their experiences, their hopes, their lives. And their lives are full of pain, experiences, and suffering. So what Cicero thinks about friendship? He has a double soul. So, for one part, he is a politician. He is a man of the party of the Senate. He is the champion of the conservative party. The moderate citizens has Cicero as his model, their model. At the same time, he is linked to philosophical culture, and he is a follower of Stoicism. But his aim is to combine these two different perceptions, something that is just private, something that must be public. This idea is that what is private just because it's public. What is spiritual and private just because it's political. We couldn't be friends if we weren't able to share the same idea of common good, of state, of management of the community. So we are friends, firstly, because we share the same idea of public. And that's why we can be private friends. So the two dimensions are strictly linked each other. And we couldn't be friends in our soul if we weren't friends and public as politicians, able to manage the community. So these two dimensions are, in my opinion, the key to comprehend this incredible suffering and painful and full of violence period. This was a period incredible, cruel, full of violence. And their lives, Cicero, Antony, Octaviano Augustus, these lives are full of cruelty, compromises. Every day Antony says something and the day after says the different. One day he is has a speech against the killers of Caesar, and the day after he asks for an amnesty for them. So this was a period so full of confusion. And Cicero tries to put himself as a stone, something that can be solid, the idea of the ancient great tradition, but capable to look to the future. Of course, December 7th, 43, closed this experiment.
Well, I'm mindful that we're past our appointed hour. I hope the conversation can continue through the rest of the conference, but please join me in thanking our presenters for two excellent presentations.